Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to another webinar from the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. My name is Ryan Evans, and I appreciate you joining us today as we're in for hearing about building a resilient ag workforce and enhancing employee retention. And also we'll cover a little bit of the basics of H-2A workers today. So glad to have you on. Again, you can find a full schedule of all of our Center for Ag Profitability webinars and an archive of past recordings on our center's website at cap.unl.edu. And today's recording should be up there later today, probably by 4 o'clock Central or so. To present today, we're glad to be joined again by Shannon Sand, who is an extension educator and agricultural economist based in North Platte with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And we definitely invite any questions you might have to type those into the chat or in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to have Shannon answer those before our time is up today. So Shannon, thanks for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. I appreciate it. So, like Ryan said, we're going to talk about basically enhancing retention, which has been a big discussion, I feel like, within agriculture in the last probably 2 to 5 years. And we've gotten a lot of questions within the Center for Ag Profitability about H-2A workers, how to bring them over, what are those steps and those processes. So we're just going to kind of go over the basics today. Next, please. So just a quick disclaimer, I'm not an attorney, an accountant, a financial advisor, a mediator, or therapist. So I also want to state that everyone's situation is very unique, and it is always best to seek professional advice on your own situation. So next, please. So we're going to just do, like I said, a quick overview. So what is employee retention? Some strategies to increase employee retention, which is really the big one. And then some steps / overview of if you're applying for H-2A workers to come work where you're at or live. Next, please. So I feel like lately, like I said, there's been lots of conversation in agriculture focusing around labor or the lack thereof, a labor pool of employees. So this is the case all across the ag industry in the U.S. and even, again, I would say beyond in a lot of places. So this makes employee retention really important to the ag industry because we need people who are really satisfied with their job because they're more likely to stay. So employee retention is generally defined as an organization's ability to prevent employee turnover or the number of people who leave their job in a certain period, either voluntarily or involuntarily. Increasing employee retention has, again, that direct impact on business performance and success long term. Next. Okay, so to examine these questions, we first need to really kind of understand how, what are turnover rates and the different types of turnover. So there are two basic types of turnover, voluntary and involuntary. Voluntary turnover is when employees choose to leave a place of employment of their own free will. Involuntary turnover is when employees are either laid off or terminated as a result of a decision of the employer. It's really important to note that voluntary turnover is often the rate used to compare across employers and is also, again, a direct reflection of employee job satisfaction. Involuntary turnover, on the other hand, especially layoffs, is more of a reflection of the overall long-term business management, especially where layoffs are concerned. However, you don't want to really be fooled. That employee job satisfaction can also impact a business long-term and its viability. The bottom line really is that turnover costs money. The first step is to decide if you have a serious problem or one you can live with. That's by examining the turnover rates. So there are ways to calculate those turnover rates online. There are a couple of turnover calculators, and then South Dakota State actually has some really great articles on how to calculate your own turnover rates, the voluntary ones. So that's a good resource if you're interested in doing your own. If you find that your turnover is excessively high, you might want to look at conducting exit interviews with employees that quit. So keep in mind, these exit interviews should be conducted by a third party, right? Because Well, depending on the person, but most are not going to tell their bosses to their face that they're not super fond of them and that's why they're leaving. So it's really important that these exit interviews are generally conducted by a third party. So if you really want to get to the root of the reason, you probably need to have that third party conduct that exit interview. In general, I mean, the most common answer given to third parties on why someone is leaving is generally the boss. And they're, again, if you're the boss conducting the exit interview, it's much less likely that you're going to actually hear that and get to the actual root of the cause. Even if that's a boss or maybe it's a specific, you know, thing that they were looking for in terms of time off or, sick leave or, being able to make it to the kids' games or whatever it could be. It could be a ton of different reasons. Next, please. So there are some challenges which are really unique to farm and ranch businesses. We have a lot of seasonality in our operations depending on what they are. And a lot of folks in my region, which is the West Central, I cover about 25 counties. That's a lot of those folks have both corn and cows, right? And so diverse operations, depending on the time of the year, they always have something going on. But that seasonality in terms of harvesting, lambing, calving, etc. I mean, that's certain times of the year you're on call 24/7, it feels like, because you need to be there to be able to check on them. Again, those working conditions and hours are really unique to farm and ranches. And then high volatility. I think we know within the last couple of years with the changes in cattle prices as well as corn, there's a high volatility in that ag market. So things can change on a dime. Next, please. So some ways to potentially increase retention. So are you a coach or are you a boss? So our traditional way of coaching in agriculture, and I don't know if y'all have experienced it. I think probably most of us, if we've grown up on a farm or a ranch, have experienced this, whether it's with our parents, our aunts, uncles, grandparents, whoever, or your boss, is very much a watch and then you'll know sort of thing, or a get out of my way, I can do it quicker situation, or a I expect you to be psychic and read my mind. Um, those sorts of things needs to really transform to specific leadership clarity, right? Again, be a coach, not a boss. Um, as a true coach, you're going to make sure your employees understand their jobs. I talk a lot about job descriptions as well as like intake and onboarding, and this is kind of part of that. You want to make sure your employees really understand their jobs. Those expectations are clear. So if it's calving season and we need someone to come be able to come check at 2 a.m., we really need to know that you can do that. Is that a thing that you're, as an employee, comfortable with and going to be able to do for us, right? So again, you're coaching, you're not bossing. Um, the other thing with having clear expectations is, again, you have a way to hold yourself and your employees accountable, right? A lot of people I know, they're not going to ask somebody to do something they're not willing to do themselves. But again, coaching and guiding people through those steps that you need to be done, because all our operations are different, right? So we all have different things going on. And it's really important not to just expect someone to read your mind. Next, please. So this is another one that I actually am really fond of. Um, I always say communication, communication, communication in most situations. This is definitely one of those. So oftentimes we all have annual reviews. I have an annual review. Ryan has an annual review. It's just a part of the way it works. However, that being said, we also have our bosses that regularly are in contact. So frequent feedback is really important as we go along so that we know we're doing what we need to do. We know we're hitting our marks, right? So that usual approach is oftentimes we just assume we're doing a good job and someone will let us know if we're doing something wrong or if you're doing something wrong. Yet the way we let them know what's wrong has not always been in the best interest of the business or the individual. And sometimes it's not always the nicest. Again, depending on the situation and what happens, I think we can all think of different situations where, again, an emergency takes place and not always the most cool, calm, and collected are we. Instead, it's really a good idea to have ongoing conversations that include frequent updates on progress, any corrections that need to be done, as well as praise. And again, I think this is very much a thing too. Remember to praise people when they do a good job. Not necessarily that they're doing their job, but if they're doing a good job or going above and beyond, remember to praise them. People really, most folks, I should say, really enjoy feeling praised or appreciated. Um, you may ask, how can I help? How can I or others help you do a better job? I mean, just phrasing it like that, you know, these kind of conversations don't require a lot of time. It can be a 5-minute conversation that you have with your employee, but they do require a commitment from you, the leader, to be intentional and present and initiate those updates. Because you, as the leader, really need to make sure you're present, you're committed, and you're going to, again, do that follow up. And maybe, again, it's just a once a week meeting you guys have or once a month that you're like, hey, how's it going? So, depending on your situation, everybody's situation is going to be just a little bit different. Next, please. So, another way to help with employee retention is to create a job that is inspiring, rewarding, and consistent with your personal and family goals, right? So, this is kind of a two-pronged reality in a way. First, you need a business that has a clear purpose and working environment that kind of renews the motivation. Employees understand why you are in the business. So, again, what are your values? What are your goals? Um, and then also what they are to do. What do they need to do, and what is their value? They also have need to have daily interaction that is positive. Again, if we're yelled at all the time, it makes it a lot harder to get up in the morning. I was like, my dad has always had a saying, it's a lot easier to get up for a job you love than it is for one you don't. So again, make sure you have positive daily interactions for individuals and for business growth. Again, some people think some of this stuff can be a little silly, but this has been shown to, like, statistically, if you have a better positive work environment, people are going to stay longer, they're much happier, and they're much more committed to your business and your operation. So, the second requires you as a leader to understand what is important to each employee. Again, that's going to be different. So, you really need to know everybody. This might be flexible time to attend their kids' activities, opportunities to participate in training sessions to grow their skills and knowledge, or compensation based on the real value they bring to the business. Um, Not just loyalty of years worked. You'll need to ask to know. I've learned that strong leaders know they're in the people business and that it's much better to have a satisfied, energized work crew than to always be looking for new employees. And again, given the current climate, it's much harder to find those really good employees. Next, please. So, onboarding employees is also part of this. Now, you can go back to the cap.unl.edu. We have a webinar previously talking about intake and onboarding employees. So, that includes things like job descriptions, knowing who to go to for questions. Again, understanding processes and procedures, knowing about any additional trainings or certifications or advancements that are potentially available. A lot of people, they want to eventually move on to like some sort of management or leadership position potentially. Do you have that opportunity in your operation? Or maybe there's a potential for them to, you know, if you have cows, I was like, sometimes they'll give you like a half a beef or, give you the potential to buy into their operation. I've seen that work really well for some operations. Um, and then again, expectations for performance, knowing the expectations of the employer, what you're supposed to do. And not just that, but if there are metrics to go with it, what targets am I trying to hit? Things like that. Next, please. So I have a colleague that one of her favorite sayings is, if it's not in writing, it's not real. And I really love that saying for a lot of things, including this. So I know that this is used a lot in the dairy industry as well as like poultry and pork, but not as much in the cow calf and the crop side. But create a written standard operating procedure uh, as again, like I said, if it's not in writing, it's not real. So you want to do this for a few reasons so that everyone is on the same playing field, everyone follows the same rules and understand what needs to be done and who to go to for help, questions, etc. as well as, again, expectations for certain times of the year in terms of working. So, again, creating a written standard operating procedure really just helps clarify and allow for people who have any questions or things. Sometimes you can just refer back to the manual, right? For what those, again, metrics are, those clear operating procedures, who's, XYZ job description, things like that. So they can make sure they're following what needs to be followed. And I know that a lot of times with our job descriptions, they end up needing to be kind of flexible, but still, it's really good to have that. So, next, please. So you're getting this disclaimer again because we're fixing to go into H-2A workers. So just again, not an accountant, not an attorney, not a financial advisor. So next. So we've been getting a lot of questions at the Center for Ag Profitability about H-2A workers. What are they? If we wish to apply, if you're an operator and you wish to apply for one, what all is required, what is needed. So in these, I have included the references where I pull from specifically for each of these slides. So if you want, you are more than welcome to go back and read through those. Farmers.gov has a really great checklist. Now, keep in mind, that's a federal checklist. States have their own. So you will likely want to search that out depending on the state that you're in. But for Nebraska, Nebraska Legal Aid has a lovely document available for you that you can also check out. So the H-2A temporary agricultural program helps employers who anticipate a lack of available domestic workers to bring foreign workers to the U.S. to perform temporary or seasonal agriculture work, including, but not limited to, planting, cultivating, or harvesting labor. You can also those people are available if you need sheep herding, cattle workers, anything along those lines of. Depending on the type of work you need, temporary or seasonal ag work can happen on farms, ranches, nurseries, ranges, greenhouses, orchards, or other similar locations. Like I said, H-2A workers are currently being utilized throughout the U.S. It's been a great program so far. Seasonal work is when you need more help than usual because the work is tied to a certain time of year by an event or pattern, like a short annual growing cycle. Temporary work lasts no longer than 1 year. If you have been affected by a strike, work stoppage, or layoff within 60 days of when work will start, you may not qualify for the program. Again, you really want to check that farmers.gov has a lot of great resources on H-2A workers. So to participate in the program, you'll work with your state workforce agency to earnestly recruit U.S. workers. The state workforce agency will publicly post your job order to recruit U.S. workers. You have to accept eligible referrals of U.S. workers who apply for the job and also contact any former U.S. employees at their last known contact address. When a qualified U.S. worker applies, you must employ them until 50% of the work period specified in the work contract has passed. After 50%, there is no continued affirmative obligation to hire. So you have to look for U.S. workers first. So next, please. So this is some information from Legal Aid of Nebraska. Again, they have a great, lovely handbook available. So for H-2A workers specifically, transportation must be given for free from housing to the work site, from the work site to work site. So, right, a lot of us have multiple operations, or from, if needed, depending on where they're housed, your permanent home in Nebraska. Next, please. So again, some additional requirements. You need a separate seat for each passenger is required in your vehicle. I say your vehicle, but a vehicle. Seats must securely be attached to the vehicle. Doors and windows that are not broken. Seat belts as required by law. Brake lights and blinkers must be well maintained. And then side and rear view mirrors must be attached. So, and again, this is specifically related to from the Legal Aid of Nebraska. Housing must be provided, like I said, for free, and houses must have kitchen facilities, or the employer must provide 3 meals a day. You can charge for them, but there is a limit in Nebraska. And again, I would really talk to my attorney on what those are. Next, please. Oh, next. Sorry. There we go. All right, so H-2A worker requirements continuing. So the rate of pay is the adverse effect wage rate. So the adverse effect wage rate, or AEWR, is a regional weighted average hourly wage rate for field and livestock workers combined as measured by the USDA's annual farm labor survey of non-supervisory farm and ranch workers. Most regions include more than one state. Next, please. So again, some laws and obligations. Employers can't hold or confiscate workers' passports or other immigration documents. Employers may also be subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 as amended. There can be no strike or lockout during a labor dispute at the work site. Employers can't discriminate against or discharge without just cause any person who has filed a complaint, consulted with an attorney or an employee of a legal assistance program, testified, or in any manner exercised or asserted on behalf of himself or herself others any right or protection afforded by Section 218 of the INA or the H-2A regulations. Next, please. So H-2A workers are guaranteed payment. There's a 3/4 guarantee. So under the H-2A visa program, employers must guarantee workers employment hours equal to at least 75% of the workdays in the contract period. The employer will pay workers who weren't offered sufficient hours. For example, if a contract is for a 10-week period, right? Maybe they're picking strawberries, where a normal work week is 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, the worker would need to be guaranteed employment for at least 360 hours. So 10 weeks times 48 hours a week times 480 multiplied by 75. So you have to at least be able to guarantee that. Next, please. Thank you. H-2A workers are not required to pay Social Security and Medicare taxes on their wages. In addition, the employer is not required to pay the taxes on the worker either. Workers may owe U.S. federal income tax when they file income tax returns for the year. If both the worker and the employer agree to withhold federal income tax, employers can withhold. In order for the employer to withhold taxes from the worker's compensation, the worker must complete and return the W-4 employee's withholding allowance certificate to the employer. Please note that some states allow employers to withhold the employee's a portion of workers' compensation. Next, please. So the standard filing process for hiring H-2A workers, now that we've covered all of the requirements, I've had a lot of people ask questions about if I'm interested, how do we go about it? First thing I'm going to tell you, again, talk to your state workforce agency, and then also you're going to need an attorney who ideally has experience and or specializes in H-2A workers. Those do exist. They are out there. There are several. You can go to, I believe, the Nebraska Bar Association. You can narrow that down by field if you're looking for that specific. So now this is just the standard. There are other ones which we'll talk about in a minute. So basically, the first step is you, as the operator, applies for a domestic job order with that local state workforce agency between 60 and 75 calendar days before the date the work needs to start. The state workforce agency provides approval of the job order. You submit a temporary labor certification. It's this form listed here, ETA 9142A-H2A application for temporary employment certification. It is online. You can do that with the Department of Labor's Office of Foreign Labor Certification using its FLAG system, at least 45 calendar days, again, before the date they need to start working. The Department of Labor's Office of Foreign Labor Certification will provide the producer with its final determination. So you then complete an H-2A visa petition with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And then the workers apply for the H-2A visa with the Department of State and complete any consulate interviews. Approved workers travel to the worksite and arrive on that start date with an arrival/departure record, though. And I do want to say a lot of times with people I know that have used H-2A workers, oftentimes they end up um, rotating through family members if it works out really well and kind of ending up with an extended family. So, I mean, there's again, and that's just the people that I know that have worked with H-2A workers, and this is I'm thinking specifically of some sheep herds. But yeah, so I know some folks that this has worked out really well for them and has been an excellent again way for them to find people that know what they're doing and have an idea of their lifestyle, and it's worked really well for some folks. So next please. So now, this is in the case of an emergency. So this is an H-2A worker's emergency. This is how you do that. So you want to follow the same steps as the standard filing. If you need your H-2A workers in less than 45 days, you're going to do what's called this, which is an emergency filing. So during an emergency filing, the producer is going to submit a job order with the state workforce agency and apply for a temporary labor certification with the Department of Labor's Office of Foreign Labor Certification at the same time. Usually you got to do 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Here you're combining it because again, you're 45 days out and you just can't find anybody. The operator needs to indicate that their application is being filed with a request to waive the regulatory time period due to an emergency situation. Again, this is where having a really solid attorney or someone who specializes in this is really handy. The producer must submit a statement justifying the request for waiver of the time period requirement. Next, please. Sorry. Thank you. You have two options for extending workers on current H-2A visa contract. So you have a short-term extension of 2 weeks or less. So you basically submit an extension request directly to the Department of Homeland Security. And then for a longer-term extension of more than 2 weeks, you have to apply by sending a notice to the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Foreign Labor Certification that explains the request for a long-term extension. The U.S. Department of Labor will then notify the producer of the decision that they've made. Next, please. So for 3 years, really, really important that we keep track of our information at least, right? So you want to keep your own records and information in a safe place, kind of like with your taxes and Medicare look back. So 3 years you need to hang on to hours worked or a piece rate units worked each day, amount paid in each paycheck, deductions from each paycheck, name, address, and EIN or FLC, and the farm owner. Where to keep your records? You really want to keep this somewhere safe, as in, a fireproof lockbox, a locked filing cabinet at your permanent house. Could be a safety deposit box. Maybe it's encrypted in a cloud storage somewhere, but you really want to make sure it's safe. A good idea is also, again, to have some photos on your phone showing them working so that they were physically there. You can prove that if it's needed. And like I said, encrypted cloud storage is a wonderful thing nowadays. We've got that. So again, all right, next, please. All right. And with that, I will take questions about any of the things we have talked about so far. I know it was a lot and it went really quickly.
And we invite you to type those questions into the Q&A panel or into the
Yes.
chat box as you're able. Thanks, Shannon, for that presentation. Just a reminder that this recording will be up on our website. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat where you can find that later today on our Center for Ag Profitability webinar page. And we'll put these slides up there as well.
Yeah.
We'll give it just a minute. If you have a question, anyone has a question that comes to mind, we'll hang out here to get those answered. If you don't have any questions, then as you close out of Zoom today, you'll see a really short survey from the Center for Ag Profitability. If you don't mind just taking 30 seconds to fill that out, it helps us with evaluating all of our webinars and with ideas for any future webinars as well. So we'd appreciate your feedback on that.
Yeah. If you have additional questions and you are not comfortable asking them here, please feel free to reach out to me via email if you want. It is ssan2@unl.edu. So,
Put your email in the chat as well here.
oh, thank you.
All right. Well, I don't see anything right now. So, Shannon, if you don't have anything else, we'll go ahead and close this out for today.
No, thank
But
you.
yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you everybody for attending today. And again, we hope you'll check our Center for Ag Profitability website at cap.unl.edu for this recording later today if you want to watch it again or share it with anyone that may have missed it. And we'll be back on Monday next week with the next webinar from the Center for Ag Profitability. It's the first Ag Land Management Quarterly webinar of 2025 on Monday at noon Central. You can sign up for that on our website as well. So with that, thanks again, Shannon. Thank you everyone for attending and hope you have a great afternoon.